Welcome, everybody. This is Overland 160. We're hitting as many Overland campaign battlefields as we can, and now we find ourselves at Todd's Tavern between the Wilderness and Spotsylvania. I'm Gary Adelman. We've got Andy Poulton behind the camera. Soon you'll hear from Dan Davis, Chris White. Who knows, maybe even Sarah Kay Byerly will come out as well. The Overland campaign is complex. Sometimes we boil it down to just being the Wilderness, Spotsylvania, Cold Harbor, and then on to Petersburg. But there are a lot of places in between, such as North Anna, Totopotomy, Hawes Shop, and this place, Todd's Tavern, where you've got a lot of connections, not only Revolutionary War connections, but then you've got cavalry action, you've got Civil War infantry action, and then more. So we got a lot to say about it. Before we do, we're really proud to say that we are standing on land preserved by you, the members of the American Battlefield Trust, and I am standing right at the site of the original Todd's Tavern. We have Frankenstein artwork of it. We also have early post-war photo of it, and it was right here, and you can kind of see the mounds of where some of the ruins sit at the time here. And then this is an extensive track, and maybe we'll be able to add on to some of these holdings someday. So with no further ado, to learn about some of the history, let's bring this on over to Dan Davis, American Battlefield Trust.
Thank you, Gary. Hello there, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our coverage of the 160th anniversary of the Overland campaign. But before we get back into the Overland campaign, I want to talk about one of the connections that Gary mentioned that this property has. Now, in the summer of 1781, so those of you who are familiar with the American Revolution will go back and realize that this place has a connection to the Lafayette and Cornwallis campaign here in Virginia. Charles Cornwallis is going to march north into Virginia, unable to defeat Nathaniel Greene's Continental Army in the Carolinas. He's going to bring the war into Virginia to try to cut off Greene's supply line. Through a number of movements and machinations, he's going to engage the Marquis de Lafayette here in Virginia. And throughout the spring and summer of 1781, Cornwallis and Lafayette are going to dance across the central part of Virginia, touching on many places that will be involved with the Civil War later on: White Oak Swamp, Malvern Hill, and here at Todd's Tavern, because Lafayette is going to camp just down the road, the Catharpin Road behind me that you can probably see here in the distance, at a place called Corbin's Bridge on the Po River. Lafayette's then going to march up the Catharpin Road, turn left, and march north along the Brock Road toward the Wilderness. And he's going to ultimately set up another camp in what is today the Elwood Plantation that we also visited in one of our earlier videos. Lafayette is trying to keep between Cornwallis and the logistical center at Fredericksburg, but also unite with Anthony Wayne and the Pennsylvania line that is coming down to reinforce him. Lafayette will also be at Ely's Ford, famous for being involved with the Wilderness and Chancellorsville battlefields. He'll march through Culpeper, ultimately unite with Wayne somewhere off to the west in Orange County, and the Wayne and Lafayette's road here in Virginia will end with Cornwallis' surrender at Yorktown later on that fall. Now, jumping back into the American Civil War, the morning of May the 7th, Ulysses S. Grant is going to send out orders to make all preparations during the day for a night march to Spotsylvania Court House. As we talked about in one of our earlier videos, Grant has decided that there will be no turning back. He's going to clear the Wilderness, get out into the open, and engage Lee, where he can bring to bear his superiority in numbers and artillery. Now, the critical part of Grant's movement to Spotsylvania is to control the Brock Road. It's the main road leading out of the Wilderness to Spotsylvania Courthouse. It's right behind the camera. It's Grant's north-south axis. And as we've been talking about the road networks here, and throughout our coverage of the Battle of the Wilderness, we find ourselves here at yet another intersection. Again, the western branch of the Catharpin Road is just over my right shoulder, and I'm going to ask Andy to pan around to give you not only a great view of what you've preserved here, but also point out over to near the Todd's Tavern Market. You might be able to see a white truck, and that white truck is parked near the eastern branch of the Catharpin Road. Now, why is this important? It's because the western branch of Catharpin Road leads to the Po River, Corbin's Bridge, and Lee's right flank. The eastern branch is important because that will, if you're a Confederate, that'll take you on up to Chancellorsville, the rear of the Federal Army, and the very critical and crucial Federal supply wagons. So on the morning of May the 7th, there's been heavy fighting off to my right on May the 6th between Thomas Ross's Confederates, George Custer's Michigan Wolverines, and Thomas Devon's brigade. Custer's going to pull back to the Catherine Furnace on the old Chancellorsville battlefield, and on the morning of May the 7th, he's going to send the 1st Michigan down the Furnace Road to yet another road intersection. 1st Michigan is going to turn left and begin moving down the Brock Road, and they're going to encounter elements from Fitzhugh Lee's division just above this intersection. The fighting is going to pick up. Thomas Devon's going to send forward reinforcements, and eventually both sides are going to break up the fight, but Lee is going to pull back beyond the intersection and off to the south. And there he's going to order his 2 brigades to begin tearing down fences and building barricades for the Federal onslaught that they know is coming. Later on in the morning, David McMurtry Gregg's division is going to arrive down here at this intersection. Gregg is going to send some men down the western branch of the Catharpin Road toward Corbin's Bridge. They're going to rein up just short of the river because across the river, Stuart has deployed the divisions of Rooney Lee and Wade Hampton. Gregg's going to decide not to make a fight, but begin pulling back to the area that we're standing in. But Stuart's going to pursue. He's going to send men under Pierce Manning, Butler Young, and James Gordon to engage Gregg. And I mentioned James Gordon in particular because he's somewhat of the forgotten Confederate, one of the forgotten Confederate casualties that has suffered during the Overland campaign. He's going to be killed in action just outside of Richmond on May 13th at an engagement at Meadow Bridge along the Chickahominy shortly after his own chief, Jeb Stuart, was mortally wounded at Yellow Tavern. The fighting is going to pick up, but it's going to be stalemated down in the area along the western branch of the Catharpin Road. About the middle of the afternoon, Wesley Merritt's division is going to arrive here in Todd's Tavern, and Merritt's going to push his old brigade, the Reserve Brigade, south to engage Fitzhugh Lee. That engagement is going to spark a rather heated firefight to the point where both Merritt is deploying up reinforcements from his side from Gregg's division in the form of Henry Davies' brigade, but Fitz Lee, who has stacked his brigades one behind the other along the road, is also going to push up his reserve brigade under Lunsford Lomax to create a very solid front blocking the road south for the Federals. Darkness will eventually bring it into a very spirited fighting here around Todd's Tavern, and the Federals are going to pull back toward the tavern. But the critical aspect of this fighting is that the Confederates still block the road to the south, the road that Grant and Meade to have open to get to Spotsylvania Court House. Now, what's also interesting about this fighting is that it's hard to trace the cavalry commander, the Federal cavalry commander, throughout the day on May the 7th, Phil Sheridan. Phil Sheridan and George Meade had not gotten off on good footing when Sheridan had been brought from the Western Theater by Grant. Sheridan has his own ideas about how to use his cavalry. He wants to use them as a mounted strike force. Meade wants to use them in their more traditional roles of scouting, screeding, and reconnaissance. So the two men are not on speaking terms. But at some point during the day, an order is going to arrive in Sheridan's headquarters, ordering him to clear the Brock Road to the south to open the way to Spotsylvania Court House. We don't know where Sheridan was when that order arrived. Needless to say, as much as Sheridan is going to brag about how well his troopers did engaging Stuart and the Confederates, he's not going to be able to accomplish the task assigned to him by Grant and Meade. And Grant and Meade are going to find this out in rather shocking fashion when they arrive here, again, marching south towards Spotsylvania Court House. Meade and Grant had anticipated that the road to Spotsylvania would be opened by the Federal cavalry. And Meade is aghast when he arrives here around the tavern to see the troopers from Gregg's and Merritt's divisions sleeping around the tavern, rolled up in their bedrolls. And George Meade, the old goggle-eyed snapping turtle, known for his volcanic temper, is going to begin moving from trooper to trooper, kicking them out of their bedrolls to get them back on their feet, onto their horses, and sending them off to the south. But Meade is absolutely apoplectic with Sheridan's lack of attention to detail here at Todd's Tavern. And very soon, later on that night, and into the early morning hours of May the 8th, Meade is going to order his infantry, who is following behind Gouverneur Warren's 5th Corps, to come up and deploy and take the spot of the cavalry because the cavalry had not been able to accomplish their mission. And to talk about more of that infantry fighting, I'm going to bring on Chris White.
Thanks, Dan. Andy, let's take a little walk up in this direction. So as Dan was pointing out, we have some moving parts that are taking place. So on the Confederate side, we have Robert E. Lee's troopers, commanded by Jeb Stuart, who are blocking the road south towards Spotsylvania Court House, but they're also blocking the roads out in that direction to the west, which will be the approach route of the Confederates. Confederates are behind the camera, moving in a very circuitous route down towards Spotsylvania Court House. Federals are off to my right, moving down the Brock Road, another portion, the eastern portion of the Catharpin Road, coming into this point. Ulysses S. Grant, when he shifts his base of operations from the wilderness area down towards Spotsylvania Court House, what he needs to do is establish a new supply base because he logistically needs to supply his army. So he's going to start to focus on Fredericksburg, which is about 15 miles to the east of us. It's a port on the Rappahannock River. It has a railroad, has two major roads coming in and out of it, and one of the major roads will lead down to Spotsylvania Court House, the next place where we're going to head down to, and the next place where Grant wants to go to. Now Meade, who's nicknamed Old Peppery by one of his staff officers, is living up to his nickname. He doesn't like Sheridan. Sheridan doesn't like him. But the 5th Corps starts marching down the road, led by John Robinson, a hairy man in one of the hairiest armies in American history. And he is going to go pushing down this road and tell the cavalry to get the hell out of the way because he doesn't think the Cav's doing any good job. In the meantime, Fitzhugh Lee, the nephew of Robert E. Lee, is just witnessing heroism on that road, a great delaying action. He's going to see his horse artillery putting up a great fight, nearly losing their commander, but that delaying action is going to keep slowing us, and we'll pick up that story on another video. In the meantime, with the Confederates moving in this direction from the north, along the western side of where we are, and then eventually down towards the south along a series of roads, Robert E. Lee needs to make sure that if Philip Sheridan, who either intentionally lied to U.S. Grant and Meade or completely didn't know the situation down here, if those roads were actually cleared by all of his men like he claimed they were, which they weren't, the Catharpin Road and the Brock Road, if the Union Army starts marching down the Catharpin Road, it can cut off the head of this snake of the Confederates as they move down towards Spotsylvania Court House. So they can't have that. Lee, in the meantime, has had to reorganize his army as a new 1st Corps commander named Richard Herron Anderson. Anderson's leading the march to Spotsylvania Court House. He has his 2nd Corps by Old Baldy, Richard Ewell, but his 3rd Corps is under the command of Jubal Early, his bad old man, because A.P. Hill, the perennially sick Hill, is out of action for this campaign. So Jubal Early will start to move a new division commander named Billy Mahone into an area, and he is going to start supporting that with Wade Hampton's cav, specifically the Laurel Brigade, who's newly arrived here. And they're going to face off against Winfield Scott Hancock's 2nd Corps. As Union 5th Corps moves that way, 2nd Corps moves into this area as well. They're going to start facing off in this direction. The idea is to make sure if the Confederates come in, they can't cut off the head of this snake, of the Federals. Well, over the next few hours, the Federals will kind of lob some shells in that direction from artillery. Confederates will do the same thing. Hampton, Early, Little Billy Mahone, they're all very aggressive. They decide they're going to push out towards this area, and they'll engage with 24-year-old Nelson Miles, the future commander of the U.S. Army and a Medal of Honor recipient for actions at Chancellorsville. Miles has a brigade deployed out in that direction. Along the skirmish line will be the 26th Michigan Infantry and 7 companies of the 140th Pennsylvania, and they're out there, and everything seems to be going well. And then the Confederates, being Confederates, go to pick a fight. They send out part of Company C of the 35th Virginia Battalion of Cavalry under Lieutenant Thomas White. He will set up some sharpshooters and start picking off some of these Federals. They get pretty upset. They start sending some more men to the front, and then the Confederates attack in force to the point where they nearly capture the 61st New York. They have to be saved by a battalion of the 140th Pennsylvania. They get pushed back. Nelson Miles sees things falling apart, and he sends one of his staff officers, Robert Robertson, to the front, man with almost 2 first names, goes out to the front. He starts pulling back all the troops towards where we're standing. And as he does so, he finds out he's the last Union soldier out there. He rides his horse as fast as he can, jumps it over top of a fence, but he hadn't fastened his saddle tight enough, and the saddle slides, and he falls off of his horse. Jumps back up on top of his horse, holds the side of his neck, and rides off the battlefield. They'll establish a defensive line near here, the Federals. Confederates will come in. Robertson will look towards the right of the line and see the 183rd Pennsylvania, a new regiment, start to run and break. Robertson rides to the front, rallies the men, and counterattacks, stopping the Confederates. And for his actions here at Todd's Tavern, he is a recipient of the Medal of Honor. But Jubal Early, though he's aggressive, realizes I might have bit off more than I can chew, because what is all on the other side of there is not just one infantry corps of the Federal Army, but three. The 5th in that direction, 2nd Corps, 6th Corps coming in this way as well. So Early kind of pulls back. The Federals themselves will kind of pull back, and then we'll have a standoff here. And as Robertson later put it, the great battle, or I'm sorry, as Francis Walker, the 2nd Corps historian, will say, the great battle of Todd's Tavern never took place. But it's interesting, one of the things that the Federals were doing were actually resupplying. There was beef on the hoof, there were cracker boxes, and this becomes known as a cracker box fight because the Confederates come in and capture a lot of the rations for the Federals in the middle of this battle. Now, what happens after this is a shift southward. The Union 2nd Army Corps will be shifted towards the south. They will start to reinforce the Spotsylvania line. Jubal Early will do the same thing, and this will turn into the backwater of the armies. But Todd's Tavern, for about 24 hours, was the hot spot for the Federal Army as well as the Confederate Army, and this was the front line of the war. And I encourage you, if you ever have a chance, if you're heading between Spotsylvania and Wilderness, make sure you stop here at Todd's Tavern. Civor Trails has a pull-off spot. They also have some signage out here, so it's a great place to come to. And of course, the members of the American Battlefield Trust have done a lot of work out here to help preserve land, and we might have some more opportunities out here in the near future.
Thanks so much, Chris, and thanks to Dan as well. Oh my God, I'm on here with the wrong hat. It's kind of cold out right now, so excuse me right there. I just want to say that, while we're shooting these things, in case any of y'all are ever curious, while we're off camera, we're preparing for what we're going to say, but we start looking around, and before and after we shoot, we walk around and look around and learn more about the Civil War. I'm not encouraging you to come out while we're shooting. Good luck finding us anyway. But come to a trust event. Come and meet like-minded people who are interested in this subject and probably just want to talk about it just like you do. So I just wanted to encourage y'all to do this. Here comes Chris White, because I was about to wrap it up.
Well, what I wanted to say is poor Andy behind the camera. What happens is we start BSing behind the camera. Oh, this will be 7-minute video. But Dan's got this to say. Oh, you know what I just remembered? And 24 minutes later, here we are at Todd's Tavern. Sorry, Andy.
Here we are, literally. And with that, let me put a bow on this thing. Thanks for watching. Please share this with your friends. Thanks for all your support of battlefield education and preservation.
Hello, this is Trace Atkins. To stay up to date on all the latest and coolest videos, please subscribe to the Trust's YouTube channel. Preserve, educate, inspire.